Good morning, Uri. Thank you so much for being here today. It's an honor to have you here talking to us today. Thank you.
Well, it's a pleasure. We've had just a few conversations, but it feels like we've known each other for quite a while. It's an honor to show up and have this conversation with you and the society.
Thank you. Could you please introduce yourself and tell us more about what you do, who you are, and where you're from?
Okay, let me see if I can do all of those. So my name is Uri Schneider. I am first and foremost imperfect human, always looking to grow, always looking to learn, always looking to evolve, and to surround myself with people like that. I am a husband, I'm a father, I'm a son, I'm a friend. I lead a team of speech therapists at Schneider Speech, which is a private practice based out of New York and also around the world. I am also the leader and founder, creator of this community, Transcending Stuttering, as well as on the research team and faculty at University of California, Riverside with Dr. Jerry Maguire, a team of researchers looking to really push the frontier of understanding stuttering and how that can evolve into practical frontline impact in the lives of people who stutter and people who care about people who stutter. And overall, transcending stuttering is what I live, breathe, wake me up in the middle of the night. That's what I'm dreaming about. And we could talk more about that. But thank you so much.
That's great. So you did mention transcending stuttering, but before we go into that, I would like you to tell us what is actually stuttering for those who might not really know that much about this topic.
To go back to something you asked me before, if anyone wants to find out where to find me or to access a lot of free content as well as ways to go further, you can go to schneiderspeech.com. We also have a new address, transcendingstuttering.co, not .com, but transcendingstuttering.co. And anywhere that you're on social media, you can look up Schneider Speech as well as the podcast, Transcending Stuttering. Episode 65 was extra special. We had a very special guest, and it was a home run and has been downloaded and listened and loved by people around the world. So your question of what is stuttering? It's a great opportunity to see how different people would come to that question. So I think first and foremost, disclosure, I don't stutter. I've worked with about 200 people every year that I'm involved with who are people who stutter or parents of kids who stutter. So that's my greatest credential, more than my professional credentials and the initials that follow my name. But those are my greatest teachers. And so if I had to define stuttering, stuttering is a neurophysiological experience. It could be thought of similar to an allergy. So it has a physical basis that has to do with the threshold at which a person experiences some sort of unintentional, non-volitional interference, interruption in the flow of their speech. And so the person knows what they want to say, they can feel very secure with what they want to say, but there's a certain instability and a certain amount of unpredictability, whether the system of taking an idea, putting it into words and sending it to the speech motor system, whether there's going to be a dependability and a consistency with the way that comes out. And so stuttering is the interruption of that and the lack of dependability with that. And what develops for most people doesn't start this way. It's not the core genesis of stuttering, but preschool kids don't have a lot of self-consciousness about it. Very often you can watch a preschool child stuttering. Parents could have all sorts of reactions, which are totally valid and understandable. But you watch the child mid-stutter, and they still have a smile plastered on their face. They still have the excitement to share their thoughts and feelings with the world. Later on, as the years go on, many kids grow out of stuttering, which is really interesting, and I think that's important to highlight. But as the years go on, many people retain this trait. So for those people, into the school years and junior high school and college and adulthood, there's a layer beneath the surface of thoughts and feelings and ways of coping, adapting, coming to terms, not coming to terms with stuttering, which adds this invisible layer, but a very, very significant real component of the experience. It could be thought of like the iceberg. There's the stuff people see and hear, and then there's the stuff people can't see and hear, the thoughts, the feelings, the unspoken words. And it can also be a source of an asset because people who stutter, whose words don't come easy, when they choose to speak, there's a certain strength in what they've chosen to share. There's a certain determination, a certain value, certain thoughtfulness and intention that I am totally enamored by. And so I think looking at the visible side and the invisible side that can develop, those are the two sides of the experience. And for different people, it's different, but everybody has some portion above the surface and some portion beneath. And there can be upsides as well as challenging sides to each of these parts.
Great. Thank you so much for this, great explanation. Thank you, Uri. And going back to transcending stuttering. So what is it exactly, and how does it work?
We're figuring it out. That's what's beautiful. It's in evolution, and it's somewhat organic. So I see myself kind of as like creating a framework with which people can grow and connect. And as different vines grow and connect in different ways, the whole entity, the whole orchard starts to blossom, and it's become a bit of an ecosystem. So we have individual therapists that find it to be a useful framework to understand stuttering and to understand people who stutter and to show up in a very supportive way in support of people who stutter as guides for people who stutter. We have the podcast, we have the social media, we have now a community of people who are professionals who are coming, whether they're in grad school or they're veterans, stuttering specialists, who are coming together to share ideas, to feel validated, to air out creative thoughts, things that might not be the popular conceptions, but having a safe space to nurture different perspectives and experiences, and ultimately coming out with this really rich, safe space that is cultivating incredibly exciting ideas and supportive energy for the professionals. And side by side with that, we have group experiences for people who stutter to go through the same thing. So we have an online video course and an ebook, and both of these audiences are both exploring and learning and growing and sharing and enriching, both sides. And this interaction is really where it's at. So it's very much the product of a collaborative, living, breathing, growing, evolving project.
Do you know where this is going? Do you have a specific goal that perhaps you want to reach, or it's pretty, let's say, open to see where this is gonna go?
Yeah. Well, look, like everything's like a first date, There's a lot of excitement. Sometimes there's fireworks, but a real relationship needs oxygen to keep going. So you got a fire, you got sparks. That's very good. I think there are a lot of sparks out there. And then you need the oxygen to keep these fires going, and the fuel to drive it, and a place to come back to and sit around that campfire with people that you care about and that share that love and that passion, that curiosity, and that mutual respect to include everyone with respect and dignity as humans. And what brings us around the campfire is this stuttering thing. So transcending stuttering, that's what it's evolved into. That's where it's headed. There's plenty of seats at the campfire. There are enough marshmallows for everybody. We can roast them till they burn. We can do them light. The concept is that for anybody who cares about stuttering, it can be a wellspring to tap into, and a community of people that speak a common language, plain English or whatever language they speak, but can all kind of connect because the framework of transcending stuttering is so simple and sensible. It's not to the exclusion of other information. It's a framework to organize all the bits of information that exist, that are coming and emerging and exist in all different corners of the world, in research and practice and lived experiences and film and books and podcasts. But we have so much information, if we can't organize it and make it actionable, it can be overwhelming, or we can lose some of the value and the meaning. So the Transcending Stuttering framework is what's exciting, is that it helps professionals and people who stutter kind of organize their evolving understanding. And it's very much a dynamic, evolving process. But these 4 parts of the framework help organize and make things actionable.
Okay, cool. And as a speech therapist, why did you decide to focus on stuttering? And also, what is the biggest challenge when it comes to treating stuttering?
Well, first of all, I tried not to be interested in stuttering, not because of the same reason as most people. Most speech therapists, we find, don't feel equipped and are overwhelmed by treating stuttering. So we find that around the world, less than 1% of the professionals who are speech language pathologists or speech language therapists are interested in stuttering. So one of the goals of Transcending Stuttering is to change that, so that there's more interest and learning and competence, so that more of the people that are dedicated to this professional work are ready to serve those who are looking for professional guides. But my father is the greatest. He's the GOAT, greatest of all time. As a speech language pathologist, as a person who specializes in caring for people who stutter, as a mentor, teacher, confidant of so many of our colleagues and peers. So I didn't want to step into those shoes. There's no way to fill those shoes. So I really didn't want to go to stuttering. And yet somehow at every cross section of life, it just kept coming back to it. There was some fascination, some attraction, some connection of interest, but also a feeling of purpose. So my interest in stuttering is really born out of my father's example and stories of the heroic lives and the courage and the triumphs and the challenges endured by people who stutter, and the excitement of being along for the ride, of both being a supportive presence and part of that, of giving fuel, of giving space, of lending an ear, of being a champion for others, and then also being inspired by those who walk the walk and talk the talk. So that's what brings me to stuttering. The greatest challenge is probably that I don't stutter. The greatest challenge is trying to really understand the other person. The biggest challenge is to make sure that as much experience as I have and expertise that I bring, I've never met this person. So I walk into every meeting with a certain amount of anxiety and concern that will I be able to show up for this person? Will I be able to help them? Because if I jump too quickly to connecting the dots and say, oh, yeah, I've seen this before, that's where I can make a mistake. But if I show up with all the experience and knowledge that I have, but also authentically curious and listening and ready to be surprised, often things unfold beautifully. But the greatest challenge is to make sure that I really seek to understand the other as a person who stutters, maybe a person of a different gender, a different faith, a different orientation, understanding and building a bridge with people who are different and being able to connect nonetheless. To me, that's the greatest challenge and the greatest excitement.
In all of these years being a speech therapist, what has been the biggest discovery you have had around like stuttering about this topic?
I think what's fascinating to me is that currently we see an amazing time in the world. On the one hand, some of the greatest challenges worldwide as we're dealing with a pandemic that's affecting everybody in one way or another. And most importantly, everyone should stay safe and well. I wish everyone stays safe and well and that we be sensitive to one another, not just our own safety and wellness, but think of others. Financially, people are hurting. And just around the world, if we look beyond our own borders, we see a lot of suffering in the world, exacerbated by what's going on. At the same time, it's a very exciting time in terms of difference, pride, celebrating the things that make us who we are, and not just looking at the disability and the difference, but also the different abilities and different opportunities. And so looking at everything as two sides of the same coin, what I find fascinating is as more and more comes out in the research, so for example, understanding the neurological basis, the predisposition that people have to having a stutter being hardwired at birth, emerging later on perhaps, or genetically marked but not presenting itself because different conditions didn't play out for that person. There are two sides to each of these pieces of information. They can be extremely liberating. They can free us from the feeling of guilt, of shame, of fault, whether that's our parents, whether that's ourselves. The flip side is it can also be experienced by someone as a feeling of like, I'm doomed. It's hardwired, it's genetic. Oh my gosh, I guess there's nothing I can change. Or, oh my gosh, I would be terrified to couple up with someone, especially someone else who stutters. I stutter. I don't want to couple up with someone who stutters. And then, if we're to have children, maybe there's a greater chance we're going to pass that on to them. Of course, that story could be exactly the opposite. I'm looking for someone who stutters, and I would be happy to be a parent of a child who stutters because I feel I have an advantage. But this is the whole thing. The way any story can be flipped. There's nothing that I have found in the research or in the lives of people who stutter that is an absolute good or bad. It is what it is, and each thing has value for what it is. And if we can figure out how to make the best of different things, we can actually find some opportunity. Sometimes it hurts, and sometimes people hurt, but we can emerge from that stronger, wiser, better off. Maybe not perfect, maybe not easy, maybe not comfortable, but better off. And growth happens that way. So I find that fascinating in every sphere. And if I had to say the most amazing breakthroughs or insights that I've discovered on a personal level, it's not just about betting and rooting for the underdog. It's that I've been humbled to realize that sometimes we can pick and identify who's going to be the winning horse and who might not necessarily be the winning horse in a race. But more and more often I see that the judgment or the prediction or the way I read something, oh, I think this person just, they're so weak and they have so many things stacked against them in their constitution of who they are and in the context of their life and the conditions they're living in. The parents are not supportive, the community's not accepting, they don't have any money. They're fighting so many battles. And sometimes they become the greatest success, the shining champion standing on the platform with the medal around their neck, and there's nobody cheering. The only medal is the medal of, I did it, I made it, against all the odds. And then you have people who have everything stacked in their favor. They seem to have the most supportive family and culture and assets and resources, and yet their experience is one where they continue to be frustrated and continue to try to move forward. And surprisingly, they have a really hard time getting out of that experience. So I find that exciting. I find that challenging. And I find that to be, what we need to do is really find that faith in people, give them the autonomy and the dignity to find their own way, and to recognize nobody is destined to not be able to make it. And if we just keep having that hope and that faith and hold on to that and somehow shine a light on that, often people find it and they take the light for themselves, and you pass the torch and you just follow them up to the pedestals of their life.
That's true, because what I feel and believe is that the people that have to fight the most, usually these are the ones that build better resilience and become really like stronger, and they are more ready to fight whatever comes in life. So I think sometimes if you have everything ready and you have all the support you need, you are more protected from the real world and things like this. Sometimes it can actually backfire. It's great, don't get me wrong, it's awesome to have support and have everything that you need, but it's also cliche to say that in the hard times, that's when you actually learn more. And it's true, when you go through hard times, you learn more, and it shapes you also for the future. So I think it's important to have the balance. No one wants to have just hard times, but being overly protected can also have a negative impact as well. So just commenting on what you said.
And I think for each and every person who stutters, and for each therapist, and for each community that emerges to support professionals and to support people who stutter, I think there's a nuance here that can be missed, especially in these times. There are great trends, excuse me, that are very much a rebound or recoil to an undertone of fixing, and professionals fixing people who stutter, and people who stutter feeling that message of, they tell me I'm broken, they tell me I need to be fixed, they tell me I need to talk different. Bug off. Like that's done enough harm. And then there's this other kind of extreme, which is like, it is the way it is. Buckle up, get with the program, and it's 110% acceptance to the exclusion of everything else. And I think we have to be mindful to create a space where different people's opinions, both experiences, have a place to be aired out. And that ultimately, what you were saying, you can have someone who's facing great hardship. It doesn't help them to come along and be a cheerleader and tell them, don't worry, this is great. I wish I was having the hard time you're having, because then I'd come out as smart as you're going to come out. You're got this. And on the flip side, if it's just the embrace and the holding of where you're at in a kind of quicksand, in a kind of crummy spot, you need a dose of that. You need a measure of that. But if you're looking to kind of somehow get an inch or two above water, that's okay too. And so there's room for kind of leaning in and accepting and holding yourself just as you are in that crummy feeling, crummy spot, and recognizing it's not as crummy as you thought. There's also room for saying, let me see what I can leverage and what I can actually rise up and change, because there are some open variables. And I think of the serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. We can't change things we can't change. So a therapist trying to take a person who stutters and turn them into someone who doesn't stutter is going to be a big problem. There are going to be a lot of costs, a lot of bruises, a lot of injuries in that process. On the other hand, to accept the fact, well, I guess I'm just a C student. I'm never going to do any better than getting a C in math. That would be selling out on the opportunity to find a way. What are the tools and resources? Who are the people that could be allies that could help me learn the way I need to learn, so that I can be the shopkeeper, the businessman, the entrepreneur I want to be able to be? I don't need to be a Nobel Prize winning mathematician. But if I want to have a business, or if I want to deal with contracts, or whatever it is I'm looking to do in life, I got to be good enough with math. And there's no reason to say I got to settle for C. There's room for both. So change the things we can, accept the things we can't, and wisdom to know the difference. And I think that's where sometimes having allies, having peers, having mentors, seeking professionals can be a way to figure out the wisdom to know the difference and how to push on those different levers.
Wow, so important. Thank you. I agree with you. It's so important to know this difference and keep moving forward. And going into this like approach to stuttering, in your, let's say, experience, what like approach works best for treating stuttering, and why?
People often ask, so what's your approach? Do you do this approach? Do you do this approach? And especially less in the United States, more in Europe and other parts of the world, very into approach. What's your approach? What's your approach? So I will always say, our approach is not to have an approach. Our program is the anti-program. There ain't no program. I wrote about this and talked about it recently in response to a beautiful social media post by someone else, but I've been talking about this for years. Therapy doesn't work. People work. Programs are not as important as the people. So our approach, if you will, is to step in and say, how do we show up for this person? And we need a tool belt with an array of different approaches, different tools. And when I use the word tools, I mean everything from what you might be thinking of as like a speech tool, speech technique that might be something worth exploring. If I talk like this, does it seem to make the words come out with more effort? Does it seem to make them come out with less effort? Oh, experimenting with that tool and seeing how that goes, if that works for me, if it speaks to me, if it doesn't, if I like it, if it's doable, if it gets me the results. But another tool is like listening, being able to just be present. Another tool is working on mindful meditation. Another tool would be tuning into the world of documentaries and films and books and other media to hear other people's stories, other people's expression, other people's climb, other mountains that they've climbed. So these are all tools. So I think as Uri Schneider, Schneider's speech, Transcending Stuttering, the approach should be a tool belt that each person has that has a wide array of different tools to turn to depending on the needs of the person or the needs of the moment that are in front of you. But no one approach is going to answer everyone's problems. I personally pursue learning any and every approach out there because I think the more people we learn from and listen to, we come out wiser for it. And certainly for an earlier stage clinician, it's important to have programs and protocols because you need to learn in a very structured way that covers all the bases. But practically in the real world, people don't come in looking for a program. They're looking for something that they're looking to live, break out. And we need to meet them there.
Why people who like stutter, including myself, if I'm talking alone, I'm fluent. If I'm talking to my plant, I'm fluent. But then when I'm talking to someone, I stutter. Like many people say stuttering has a neurological
Yeah.
component in it, but how come I'm fluent if I'm talking by myself? Because if it's something that is in your brain, then you would also like stutter even if you're talking to yourself. It's not something that you could control. Like I have this question that always bothered me. How come people who stutter are fluent? If I am reading out loud alone, I can read it. If there is one person listening, I will block. I will stutter. So how do you, like explain this? If there is one, explanation.
Well, I think it's a great question. I think it's a question a lot of people have, and I don't think I own the answer, but we can explore a little bit together. A couple of things that come to mind. I think it's a great question to ask as many people as you can. But I can tell you, if someone thinks they have the answer, I would caution, taking it lock, stock, and barrel. So I think I had three responses that came to mind as you were asking that question. That's such an important question. Number one, there's the question sounds like an information question, like you want to know the explanation, the factual, scientific explanation, which I will offer something to offer understanding. But I think we have to recognize that at the really behind the words is more of an emotional question. It is so darn frustrating, meaning living with that lack of understanding and predictability is exhausting, and it robs a person of having a working understanding of what's going on, and it takes away the feeling of control, of predictability. And as humans, we all want to understand what's going on, not because we really want to understand, but because it gives us a feeling of control, of stability, of having our feet on the ground. But if I often would say, you know the weather, if you walked out every day not knowing, is it going to be hot or freezing cold, raining or snowing, you don't know whether to pack an umbrella, whether to take galoshes, whether to wear warm clothing, cold clothing. it would be dizzying, it would be exhausting. So I think we want to understand things because we want to be able to prepare. And when we're not prepared and we're caught off guard, it's one of the most unsettling experiences. So I just want to highlight in all of the conversations about stuttering in the entire universe, there's a seeking information, and there's also seeking like comfort, emotional peace. And I think that we have to be mindful when we provide information that it's responding to information questions. But when the question is really begging emotional comfort, we offer emotionally comforting messages and tools. That's one response. Second, I think my father would highlight stuttering should not be thought of as a speech disorder or condition. It should be thought of as a communication condition, which means that when you're talking to the wall, you're not communicating. When you're talking to your animals, for the most part, you're talking with yourself in the presence of an animal. And I'm not going to get into that. You know, some people might feel differently about that. But when you and I are having this same exercise of the same exact words, the same exact movements, the same exact coordination, we are two human beings exchanging ideas and feelings, interests and questions and curiosities. That's called communication. The root, you could tell me better, with your excellence in multilingualism, the Latin root of communication would be, it's commune. A commune
Okay,
or
yes.
communism, all of the words that have that root, they're about connection, coming together, people connecting, people being on level ground. And so communication is where stuttering happens. And if you're talking to yourself, you're talking to the wall, it's not communication. So if we take that quirky experience that is so puzzling and so enigmatic, it actually is extremely insightful that stuttering is a communication condition, not a speech condition. The same words, the same sentence, you might not stutter speaking to the wall. Suddenly in a context of communication might happen more. And in different contexts, maybe with your mom or with your best friend, you can predict that such and such happens. And then when you're in another setting, at an interview or in front of your class with 50 classmates, it goes somewhat differently. Or if you're on the stage, performing in front of an audience or singing. So I think it speaks to the distinction of speech versus communication, which brings us to our last point. Third insight, which I'll get to like a little more science. To think, the question is based on the following. How could it be? I'm doing the same activity and I see consistently if it's in the privacy of my own room, I do not stutter. But suddenly in the presence of another person, it's as if I cannot do the exact same thing I just did. How frustrating is that? On both sides. How many of, I'm saying us, but I'm using the colloquial us, how many of us, people who stutter and those of us that care, have heard the story or experienced the night before class, rehearsing that line of poetry or that piece you needed to read or present, rehearsing your name in the bathroom 1,000 times before you go into that social situation, and you just hope that 100 times repeating it successfully is going to play out and give you success out in that mixer. I'm emotional thinking about that frustration, and it's dizzying, it's exhausting, it's painful, it's scary, and it makes a person feel very uneasy because even after it's all over, you're not any smarter for it. It only reinforces that feeling of failure and frustration. It just reinforces it for the next time to be even more worrisome and predictably futile. And that pain and that frustration can be intolerable for a lot of people, and they can make some choices to adapt. They can choose not to go to that situation. They could choose not to use their real name. They could choose not to participate in class, call in sick. They could choose to numb the pain with all kinds of different things, whether it's alcohol, drugs, other unhealthy ways to adapt. It's all understandable when you recognize that pain, that unease, that discomfort. At the core, I hope the following might just crack it open a little bit with wisdom, understanding, information to open up a world of emotional comfort, perhaps. And that is, if this pen has no ink, it will not write now, And it will not write tomorrow. It will not write while we have this conversation. And it will not write when I'm by myself afterwards. If it did, I would be wondering if there's a ghost in the room or if someone switched my pen. But the speech you're asking me about is not like a pen. It's not this static utensil or tool or activity that suddenly works one minute, doesn't work another moment. A person that has cerebral palsy often has an easier time coming to grips, coming to terms with their condition, because it's the same every day when they wake up. It's not like one day they can use this limb and one day they can't. One moment it does work, one moment it doesn't. In the privacy of their room, they're doing gymnastics. And then when they go to gym class, they're back to having whatever condition they have. But a person who stutters lives with that inconsistency. That's part of the stuttering experience for most people. So the speech mechanism, the brain is not a pencil. The brain is not one muscle. The brain has more neural connectivity than there are stars in the galaxy. There are more connections in your brain, in my brain, in each person watching, than there are stars in the galaxy. And you stop and you think about that. You recognize the complexity, the dynamic complexity of the human brain, which is the headquarters, the motherboard of the human. And when you exercise any activity, it can be made more complex and more simple based on a number of different factors. So for me right now with you, I'm not having the easiest time finding my words, as I would if we were not recording. That has added a certain amount of press. And it may appear to you and whoever's watching that this is easy for me. I'm doing it. I enjoy it. I want to be here. But it would be more comfortable if you and I had a beer and there was no recording going on. So I'm experiencing that, and so too all of us, anything we do. Let's say you're driving and you have a bunch of people in the car making a lot of noise. Is it the same driving exercise as it is when you're on your own and playing classical music? Or let's say you're tired. Or let's say you just had a really rough moment. Or let's say sitting next to you is someone that you really get bad vibes from. You feel like this constant cloud of judgment and criticism. I won't say who that person might be. So those things are things that change up the activity and the execution. So bringing it back to speech, we know that there are two loops, and this comes out of the work of Per and Jerry Maguire and many, many others. But I'm excited to be part of that team and some of that latest research really showing there are subtypes of people who stutter, of brains of people who stutter. Some people have a very physically based motor timing mechanism whereby it's very much a pretty consistent motor base. They tend to stutter similarly in more situations. There's a certain consistency to it. And ironically, while it might be more pronounced, sometimes easier to come to grips with because it is a bit more predictable. And then there are people where it's far more subtle, but no less impactful and even more frustrating because it shows up exactly when you don't want it to. And when you'd be okay with it, come on, why can't you show up now? You know? So that's a different loop that seems to be sensitive and triggered by different social elements. And so some people in a communication moment, that social press, the same activity becomes more unpredictable, unstable, and not performed with the same flow as it would otherwise. Some people, language complexity. How many of us maybe stutter more when we're talking about something of great complexity or we don't have full mastery on the topic? Mm-hmm. Some of us, it's all about how many people are there, the perception of what they're thinking, that social, emotional piece. And for others, it doesn't matter any of those things. It's really very much the constitution of how am I? Am I rested? Am I well fed? Have I exercised? Or am I at my worst? I'm exhausted. I'm irritable. Obviously, the same activity is not going to be performed exactly the same. So I hope that demystifies something for some people. That's all science, hard science, and can be used by different people if it's helpful. and can be questioned by people who want to question it, but the research is out there to learn more. I think take away all the fancy words, forget the word neurological, just
Yeah.
keep seeking understanding. But I think what you think of when you say neurological, what I think of when I think of neurological, and
Yeah.
what the next person thinks, we're not all talking about the same thing.
Yeah.
Neurological, is it neurological you're smiling right now? You know, is it neurological that I'm feeling a little hot right now? Is it neurological I'm talking? The brain, neurology has to do with the brain, but I think it's a hot word. Some people would be aversive to it, some people would like it. And that's what I was saying before. The language we use, even the language, acceptance to one person is the most comforting feeling of coming home. For another person, it's a feeling of resigning to my fate. I'm not quitting. Are you out of your mind? It's not a comforting word at all. We have to be mindful of the language, and I think that shapes a lot of these thoughts and feelings and experiences. So we have to find language that works for us.
Great. Thank you, Uri. And going to our last question today. What advice would you give to people who stutter?
I love the question. If you think about Patch Adams, it was a great movie with Robin Williams, and he goes into this psychiatric hospital, and there's this grumpy old man walking around, putting his. They know he's supposedly some math professor, but he's in an asylum, a psychiatric hospital, and everyone is treated as if they're just lost their minds. They're not really people anymore because they're in a psychiatric hospital, but he feels he's got to find the humanity in each person. And it was a very influential film for me. So he walks around, this mathematician, and he says, "How many fingers do you see?" And everybody says, "4." And he says, "Ah, you idiot." This grumpy old man. And everyone thinks he's crazy. It's 4 fingers. Fast forward, I won't tell the long story, but Patch Adams goes into his room, does something beautifully empathic, builds a bond with this man. And then he says to him, "I need you to explain to me. I know I'm missing something. What's with the fingers?" And so the man says, "Look at my fingers." And so I'll ask you and anybody that's watching or listening, put up the 4 fingers in front of your own face. Put up your 4 fingers and tell me how many fingers you see. How many extended fingers do you see? 4. Put your hand in front of your face and
Uh-huh.
look at those fingers.
Uh-huh.
No, but keep it up. Keep it up if you don't mind. Yeah? Now, but keep it between you and me. Keep it between you and me, okay? Now, instead of focusing on your fingers, focus on me.
Mm-hmm.
Put your focus on the screen, on my face. How many fingers do you see? You should start seeing the fingers getting blurry
Yes.
because you're not focused on them and you have 2 eyes. So the man says to Patch Adams, he says, the answer is 8. Because if you focus on the problem, you see 4. And that's why he's yelling at everyone. You're looking at the problem. You got to look beyond the problem. And when you look beyond the problem, you see 8 fingers. That is transcending stuttering. It's not about overcoming. It's about, this is the problem. What do I really want? So when I think about people who stutter, and I think about the most useful thing I could suggest, it's to really think about, what do I really, really want? I want to be a singer. I want to be a parent. I want to be a spouse. I want to be a public speaker. I want to be a comedian. I want to be a baseball player. Don't look at the problem and stop that from pursuing the thing that you really want. Don't look at the problem and focus so much on the problem that that's all you see. It's there. The fingers are there. But they can begin to melt away and maybe even be a source of a springboard to pursuing what you really want. It's a very hard thing to do, and it doesn't mean ignoring the stuttering, and it doesn't mean addressing it, and it doesn't mean not addressing it. It can look any number of ways, but the greatest risk that stuttering presents is not in a stuttered word or a moment that takes a little longer to get a word out. That generally doesn't hurt. The pain and the risk is in the words and lives that are not spoken, and the words and the lives that are not lived, the questions that aren't asked, the relationships that aren't cultivated, the jobs that aren't pursued, the settling and selling out because you just resign to the fact that there are 4 fingers. What am I going to do? We've got to find a way to identify, what do you want, and you want something different than what she wants and different than what he wants. What do you really care about? And then let's get there. And it may be we just blow right through this thing. It may be we go right, transcend right over it. It might be that through dealing with and coming to terms with this, we actually reach higher ground and achieve what we want to achieve with even greater success and value and respect from others. A beautiful thing my friend Dan Greenwald said. He said, imagine this year in school, if the school-age kid who stutters, now he's a kid, he's a 42-year-old man who grew up stuttering. He said, imagine as a kid, you get called on to read in class. You got a choice, fight or flight. But what if you could rise above that moment, transcend stuttering, and in front of your class say, this is me flexing my courage muscle. This is me flexing my courage muscle and banging through that reading, however it goes. The kind of respect, the kind of admiration, the kind of regard, the kind of attraction that would generate. And if people start doing that sooner, and if we nurture that kind of spirit of using the things that are hard and leaning in, we can change the worlds we live in. So you asked, what's the goal? I think that's the goal. You know, to create a world where people are embraced, where difference is seen as an opportunity, where challenges are acknowledged as challenging and difficult, and meeting the person where they're at. And if they just want to say stuttering sucks, yeah, that's your experience, and that's pretty valid. I wouldn't wish it upon anybody. And most people who stutter tell me they wouldn't wish upon someone some of the rough times they've had. And at the same time, it doesn't define you. It's not what you're all about. We should cultivate a world where people are not judged by the color of their skin, by their orientation, or by the fluency of their words, but they're based on their true worth. And most importantly, not how we judge others, how do we judge ourselves? We can't judge others nicely if we don't judge ourselves well. It says in the Bible, treat others as you wish to be treated. Well, if you treat yourself like garbage, you can't treat others like gold. So we've got to start with learning how to treat ourselves like gold. And then hopefully we can start sharing that with others.
Great message, Uri. Thank you so much. Thank you for this beautiful, beautiful message and very encouraging message. And thank you again for being here today to talk to us. It's a pleasure to hear everything that you have to share. So thank you so much. I am
Thank
grateful.
you. I'm grateful to you. I'm grateful for you for hosting this. I'm grateful to anyone who's listening to this. And most of all, I'm grateful to all of my teachers in the professional world. And most importantly, the thousands of people that have taught me. Anything I shared is really a credit to all of the people that had the patience to believe that their story was worth sharing, that it was safe enough, and their journeys have been greater lessons for me than anything I could ever learn. So what you're doing is super important, sharing, these stories in this community with everybody. So thank you. You
Thank you
betcha.
again, and I will speak
Thank
to you
you.
soon. Have a great day.
Pleasure. You too.
Bye.